Rico, if we're not recording yet, you might want to get us going on that. I think maybe that's the little recording button that I see at the top. Very good. Each month we try to make sure that people understand what's the latest information about what's going on in the Missouri General Assembly and Congress on important public policy matters. We try to prepare people to be effective and extend calls to action that will matter for the quality of life that we and our neighbors have. And we focus especially on access to basic human needs like food and shelter. And equal justice around things like criminal justice reform. Today, we're really glad to have with us a panel of folks to speak on social justice at the ballot box on November 3rd, with a focus on vote no on 3. Why this topic? Well, of course, you know, it's not that long to Election Day, so it's important that we talk about this. But especially at Empower Missouri, we think about the fact that when we come together, we win. This is something that Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, often says. Our staff is currently reading his book that's a bound sermon called We Are Called to Be a Movement. And we're just aware that how important it is that we build fusion movements where personally impacted people have leadership and where we all march together toward social justice. When we actually get social justice voters to the polls, it means that social justice minded candidates can be elected. It means that we're able to secure victories on ballot initiatives that we actually take the power into our own hands and put on the ballot through petition initiatives like the higher minimum wage campaigns that we've won in the past, the Clean Amendment in 2018 for government ethics reform, and then most recently on August 4th, closing the Medicaid coverage gap. And it's a way to build power. When we show up to vote, when social justice minded voters vote, we build power to counter the white supremacist organizing that has pushed policy violence on members of our community for decades. So today we're going to have as our speakers Kathleen Farrell, who's a former co-president of the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis. She began the Voters Guide partnership with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, a project that reaches over 250,000 folks in 7 counties. She's a former head of the Department of Communications at St. Louis University and retired from St. Louis University in 2016. She volunteers with the League of Women Voters and St. Louis Public Schools and other good causes. So welcome, Kathleen. We also will have Nimrod Chapel Jr., who has multiplied the impact of the Missouri Conference of the NAACP through his leadership as president. He's an active member of the Missouri Bar and currently serves on the Board of Governors for the Western District. He also serves on boards of and is involved with numerous community not-for-profits, civic and professional organizations. He's a trial attorney and has been involved in significant litigation to advance civil rights, workers' rights, and consumers' protections. Denise Lieberman is a civil rights attorney and nationally recognized expert on voting rights. Most recently, she served as Director of Power and Democracy at the Advancement Project National Office in Washington, D.C., a racial justice organization, and she's head of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. She's a renowned constitutional and civil rights lawyer for almost 25 years and has been at the forefront of voting rights debates in our state of Missouri and across the country. Mikel Whittier serves as Coalition's Director for the No on 3 Clean Missouri campaign, founder of Splice Strategies. He's worked with the St. Louis Integrated Health Network since October 2016 as the strategist of justice and health equity. Prior to joining IHN, he served in various roles at Mercy Hospital, St. Louis. He played a significant role in the Amendment 2 victory in August. That was an Empower Missouri priority to win on that. We're glad to see about 53% of Missourians did vote yes, so that we can close that Medicaid coverage gap. And he's co-chair of the Barnes Jewish Hospital Community and Faith Advisory Council. And then Mary Timmel is a change maker, experienced in local, state, and national organizing work. Her past experiences range from volunteer management and recruitment to policy, education, partnership building, and advocacy. She's currently an organizer with No on 3, and she brought business voices together to support closing that Medicaid coverage gap that for so long prevented more than 200,000 workers with low wages from obtaining affordable health insurance in our state. So we're glad to have all these speakers today. We want to remind you of a few basics about being on a webinar with Zoom. There's an icon of a microphone that you can use to mute and unmute yourself. You can find that at the bottom of the screen or up in the little box where your picture is. There's a little square that says mute that you can click on to mute or unmute yourself. You can also hold down the space bar temporarily to speak just briefly and then turn loose of it. It's another way to mute and unmute yourself. If you're on the telephone today, instead of on a computer, you use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. When you're not speaking, we ask you to stay muted so that it makes it easier for everybody else to hear. And you can either post questions in the chat feature or get my attention by unmuting yourself that you want to ask a question when we turn to question and answer time. There will be a recording of this webinar available on our website at the events tab not too long after we're done. You find that by looking for the word presentation. You look for today's title and then the word presentation, and that's the one that has a recording on it. We invite you to share that link with others. So thank you again for being here. We ask everyone to mute yourself when you're not talking, and we're going to turn to Kathleen Farrell as our first speaker. I'm going to find Kathleen's slides, and then we will turn it over to Kathleen to speak. Go ahead, Kathleen. I'll go and get your slides.
Yeah, good afternoon, and I'm glad to see Nimrod and Denise. We're partners in court cases, and they're terrific. So, waiting for the slides here. You got them?
I'm getting them.
Okay. Just while JMO is doing this, oh, here she's got them. You were too fast for me. So my job today is to talk about being an informed voter and where you can get the information that you need. And this is particularly important. And feel free to share this with your friends across the state who may be getting bad information via social media. But be an informed voter. That's the most important thing. Okay. Go to the next one. Okay. Defending democracy, and boy, is this important. This is the League's mission, because we do envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, and most importantly, the knowledge and confidence to participate. We're about empowering voters and defending democracy. The League, that celebrates its 100th anniversary this year, is a nonpartisan political organization. We do take positions on 2. We shout out in the loudest voice, no on 3, for example. But we try to increase understanding of major policy issues and candidates through education and advocacy. So here's what we think. Voters deserve to have the information and tools they need to safely cast a ballot. And I know that others on this panel are going to talk about safely casting a ballot. And we're very happy that St. Louis City has now put 4 absentee polling places into place starting October 12th to help protect our voters. Next. Okay, why don't people vote? And this is very interesting. And as a retired professor, I was particularly intrigued by why young people don't vote. But here's what we know. About 50% of voting age adults did not vote in the 2018 midterm elections. And here are the 3 top reasons. They didn't register, inconvenient times and places. Also, didn't think that their vote counted. And finally, do not think that they're informed enough about the candidates and issues to cast a vote. That's what we need to take care of, and that's the purpose of us providing this information. Information is power. And when we have it, and as JMO said, when we go to the polls, like-minded social justice voters can prevail. What's on your ballot? that I'm going to talk about: ballot issues, candidates, and judge retentions on the November ballot. So, ballot issues. I want to just mention some. Obviously, Amendment 1, we have two statewide constitutional amendment ballot issues. One is about extending term limits to statewide offices. And 3 other people are going to talk about, I call it Dirty Missouri. Those are on the ballot all over the state. In St. Louis City, there are 4 important issues on the ballot. One is Proposition D, which is nonpartisan elections. The first part of this calls for having 4 top city officials be elected in a nonpartisan way. And the second part of it is called approval voting. So you would vote for everyone you think is qualified and that you approve of in the primary, and then the top 2 vote getters would be on the runoff in the general election. We want to start having mayors in St. Louis that have more than 32% of the vote. Proposition 1 is the residency requirement, which is probably moot now, but that's where police and other city employees had to live in the city. You know that the legislature acted on this, but it's still on the ballot. The third one is Proposition R, which is near and dear to the hearts of Empower Missouri. And that is to have a very small increase in taxes to increase the amount of funds that the city in St. Louis can put into children's services and also early childhood education. There are thousands of children who need these services and cannot get them now. And so I hope that you take a clear look at that and educate your friends and family about it if you live in the city of St. Louis. Then there's Prop T, which is about internet network providers and changing the fee system so that they could take a risk to go into poorly served communities. And I urge you to take a look at that. Okay, other ballot issues. And I'm glad that Margie Ridge Creek is on this call because she can talk about this. But the League of Women Voters Voters Guide, which in the last presidential election got over 600,000 hits on its electronic version, serves St. Louis City and 7 counties. You can see them there and also see our website so that you can get directly into it, but we're going to show you something else as well. We also have Columbia Boone County that puts out a voter's guide. We have the League of Women Voters of Southwest Missouri and Springfield that puts out a guide, and also the League of Women Voters of Kansas City, Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties puts out a guide. And you can contact those leagues, but all of them can be gotten through 411.org, which I'm going to talk about in a second. If you have other ballot issues, they should be covered in your local communities. So here's the easy way to get all of this information, which includes the other leagues' voters' guides. Vote411.org. That's it. You click on that, you put in your street address, you know, the address you have on your voting card, and it will pull up just your individual ballot. So it'll be all the candidates, and it will be your ballot issues, and you'll have information about the candidates. You'll have information about the ballot issues, and you'll also have pros and cons about the ballot issues. So I think you'll find that helpful. Here's some other sites that I think is important. League of Women Voters website has additional information, and we talked about Vote 411. Also look at the Missouri Ethics Commission. Sometimes, all the time, all of us need to follow the money. Okay, who's supporting these votes? And I think you can learn a lot about that, and also who is supporting ballot issue initiatives. I want to add an additional resource on here that I forgot to put on, and I'll go ahead and change the slide and get it to Jeanette. But that's Ballotpedia. Boy, is it good. And it's particularly good on identifying specific groups and individuals who support or oppose ballot issues. They have excellent entries on both Amendments 1 and 3, and they also have excellent financial information where you can see who's paying for some of these things. In terms of judges, I've got a website here, which is the Missouri Bar Association website. We'll talk about that in a second, but it's www.showmecourts.org. You know that judges are appointed, but we vote on whether or not they ought to be retained. And most people don't know anything about the judges, or they may hear a rumor about one of the judges. We really need to get better information about them, and this is one source for that. The last thing is you can look at the Secretary of State's website if you want to know things about election law, to check and see if you are registered. You can also read some of the additional information about ballot issues, such as financial notes, etc. Okay, all right. I particularly want to talk about judges. Vote 411 includes the Missouri Bar Association recommendation, and that's at yourmissouriJudges.org. And I want to talk about how those recommendations are reached, because as I say at the bottom of this slide, use this information very, very carefully. It's based on performance reviews. So the Bar Association has a committee that recommends retention or not retention. And it's based on surveys. And they survey judges, attorneys, the public, who's had interactions with judges. And then the committee sits down and makes recommendations. You can also look at the questions on those surveys, because in the past I've seen, most of the time everybody's retained, but every once in a while somebody isn't retained. And I wonder why. And as J-Mo and I talked yesterday, women of color have not been retained. So we need to get some of the information about these judges. That doesn't mean that everybody should be retained, but we need to understand that the bias that exists in our community can also be reflected in the answers to these surveys. So you can get on this site and you can read. You can read the questions on those surveys. You can read some of the comments on them, and make up your mind yourself. Don't rely on what a friend of yours said on Facebook about something they heard about how this judge was terrible. And that's really, really important. Again, that doesn't mean that sometimes we don't have bad judges and we ought not to retain them, but it does mean that we ought to take this information very carefully. Okay, now, in an effort to try to get additional information, the League of Women Voters in St. Louis, for example, is having for the very first time a judges forum. I think we've got everybody in our area that's on the ballot. And we hope that other leagues and other groups across the state could do something like this. Particularly with Zoom, it's much, much easier. We're going to have our forum on Monday, September 28th at 7 p.m. And if you live in our region, you can get, on the league website for the Zoom link. But I think doing something like this across the state is really important. So contact your leagues across the state, in Columbia, in Springfield, in Kansas City, in Moberly, in Cape Girardeau, et cetera, and I'm leaving some of them out and I don't mean to. And see if they could do something like this, because I think it's really important. Again, at the end, I think it bears repeating. Voters deserve to have the information and the tools they need to safely cast a ballot with information. And that is the League's mission. And if you have any questions, I would be very happy to answer them.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We certainly agree that the key to a healthy society, or one of the keys anyway, is an informed and active voter. If we don't know what we're doing when we get to the polls, or if we don't go to the polls, we are letting our society down. So we thank you for this information that you've shared today. I wonder if anyone either has a question for Kathleen or wants to briefly mention a local ballot measure where you live, since we weren't able to, give you a comprehensive list of all across the state. Is there one on your ballot you want to make sure we know about, or do you have a question for Kathleen?
So I was either really clear or not at all. This is the teacher's dilemma.
Kathleen's presentation will be at the Empower Missouri website. If you click on events, you will find them there. And as I said, it'll advertise the event, and then it'll have a duplicate with the same title. It'll be social justice at the ballot box, but it'll have the word presentation. The one that says presentation will have any slides that get shared today posted not too long after this event is over. So thanks for asking for that.
Quick question. When I went to the Vote 411 website and put in my address, and I've checked it a number of times now, it tells me that that voter guide is not ready yet.
Okay, you know what, Lisa, I should have said that. Thank you very much. We will have this guide open online October 5th. And we're trying very hard. We have hundreds of candidates and a lot of ballot issues, and we will have it up then. I can tell you, if you live in our region, if there's something you want to know before then, say you've got to turn in your absentee ballot, please call the league office, because they could get in the back door of that database and help you with that.
Okay.
Our office is open 9:30 to 3:30 Monday through Friday. And somebody it would help if you've got the particular candidates or issues that you want answers on, but they'd be happy to help you before we get it out.
Okay, thank you.
Kathleen, thank you for highlighting that you also have noticed the pattern that I have when I've read the Bar Association reviews of attorneys, and maybe Denise would want to comment on this as well. It has seemed like that the women scored lower than the men, and that the men of color and women of color scored lower than the white guys, and that the people that got the lowest scores of all were the Black women. Have you noticed, have other people noticed this pattern when they've gone to research judges?
I mean, are you surprised about systemic disparities based on race and gender in our institutions?
I had hoped the courts would do better, but apparently the courts are not immune from that either, are they?
I mean, and I'm not suggesting there's intent involved, but I mean, this is what happens when you have systemic racism and sexism in our institutions. It seeps into everything we do, and
It certainly does, and as Kathleen said, we can read the material that's there, but let's not go with just what the surveys say. Bob Fox is naming a particular example there that he remembers. I think that may be one of the ones that you and I discussed yesterday, Kathleen. Are there any other local measures that anyone wants to mention? Anything on the ballot in like Kansas City or Columbia or Springfield that people want to highlight that they'll be voting on? Or that's not a statewide issue, just a local issue? Local initiatives can be really important. Years ago, we were able to put on the ballot in St. Louis that any tax dollars spent on professional sports projects had to have a hearing and a vote by the public, and that's helped us reduce the amount of money that we've spent on professional sports projects. unfortunately, it's been impossible to totally stop that. I see that as kind of a luxury expense that after we secure things like affordable housing and food security for everybody, I would consider maybe spending some tax dollars on a new scoreboard for a sports stadium or something like that. But there's some things that are a little more basic we need to cover with our tax dollars first, in my opinion. And then out in Kansas City, they were able to put some screening of apartments to make sure that they are healthier places to live, a system to make that happen by local petition initiatives. So these local measures can be a really important thing. All right, if there aren't any questions for Kathleen, then we will move on to the next portion of our program. And if you think of something later, we'll go back and fold Kathleen back in later. But we're going to move next to the issue of voter suppression and voter protection. What can we do to make sure that all of us do have that chance to vote on November 3rd, given that we're living in a pandemic right now? So we'll turn to Denise, and hopefully we will see Rod Chapel joining us in a moment too. I've reached out to Rod to say, I don't see you yet, Rod, and you're about to be on. So I will keep trying to reach out to Rod, and we'll start with Denise.
I'll try to do my best to play Rod. Probably can't do him justice. Thanks so much, JMO, and thanks to Empower Missouri for having me here today. And thanks so much for the really important work that you do across the state of Missouri to ensure, you know, the work that you do helps ensure that some of the people whose voices are most often silenced can be heard. And that's really critically important. And of course, that's also what working to protect the right to vote is all about. And so I'm going to share my screen. What did I do with it? There it is. Too many documents open. All right. Thanks, everyone. I think I know many of you on this call, but for those I don't, I'm Denise Lieberman. I'm the General Counsel of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, which is a nonpartisan statewide network of voter advocates. We work to protect the right to vote and to identify and combat barriers to the ballot and to support measures that make voting more accessible. And that's really the crux of it. We've been collaborating together since 2006. Empower Missouri has been a really valuable and important partner on a number of voter protection issues over the years. So let's talk about a couple things here about how we're going to vote in this pandemic. And before I hop into, I've got a couple little charts that help figure out how to navigate the complex mail voting process in Missouri, but let's start with the basics first, and that is voter registration. I don't imagine that anybody on this call has any issues with their voter registration. I'm sure we've got a group that is all registered to vote, but in Missouri, it's really important to make sure that your registration is updated, that you are actually registered to vote at your current address. Because if you've moved, especially if you have moved to a new county, you're going to actually have to register to vote again. Your voter registration does not follow you from one county to another when you move. Similarly, even if you've moved within the same county, you're going to want to update your registration to make sure that it reflects your current address. Good news is there is a way to do that online here in Missouri at sos.mo.gov/elections. And you'll see a form that looks just like this on your screen that will allow you to either print out a voter registration application or just go ahead and fill it out entirely online if you have access to a smartphone or a tablet that you can sign with. You are going to have to sign that application, but you can do so on your phone or on your tablet using your finger or a stylus. The deadline to register to vote or to update your voter registration is October 7th. And if you need any excuse to push out voter registration to your friends and family, to your constituents, colleagues, members of your church, Next Tuesday is a great time to do that. Why? Because next Tuesday is National Voter Registration Day. So it's a great time to talk about all things voting. And in Missouri, it's a really big day for voting because in addition to it being National Voter Registration Day, next Tuesday is also the start of absentee voting in Missouri. So it's a really good time it's a great excuse to lift the importance of the right to vote, to share voting information, to share voter registration information far and wide. All right. So let's talk about how we're going to make sure we can vote in the middle of a pandemic. You know, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that we have to be prepared for everything. This has been a most unusual year as we head into not only one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, but most certainly the weirdest and most confusing as well. And so the way to combat this, as we say here with this slide, make a plan. Make a plan. Encourage the populations you work with to make a voting plan. We can make this simple. I know these rules seem complicated, but we can break it down and help make it simple for people. And the best way to do that is to start ahead of time. Make a plan and make it early. And really, there's just a few questions you need to ask yourself. Am I someone that needs to vote by mail? If, in particular, if you are in an at-risk category for COVID, or if you live with someone who is, that's going to be a really important consideration as to whether you want to go to a crowded polling place on election day. Voting by mail may be the best option for you. And I'll talk in just a moment about the two ways you can do that in Missouri. Well, the second question then is, maybe I want to avoid going to the polls on election day, but I'm not so sure I trust the mail process or want to engage in a back and forth series of mailings. If you qualify to vote absentee under Missouri law, you can do so in person well ahead of election day. In fact, starting as early as this coming Tuesday, September 22nd, at your local election authority office. So if you want to avoid the polls on election day and you qualify to vote absentee but don't want to send things through the mail, voting absentee in person might be the right option for you. It won't be the right option for everybody, especially people that really need to limit their exposure outside the home. Third, you should ask yourself, if you're not going to do one of those two options, maybe you want to vote in person on election day. And for many people, that is important. And for some reason, some people, it's essential to get the kind of assistance they might need in casting their ballots. If so, you also need to make a plan for this one. In St. Louis City and St. Louis County, you will be required to wear a mask. In places like St. Charles County, it is recommended but not mandatory. So the rules are going to be a little bit different depending on where you're registered to vote. You also want to make sure you double check your polling place because it may have changed. And there have been many polling place closures or moves as a result of this pandemic. So again, number one, am I someone that needs to vote by mail? And we're going to figure out then which of the two ways to vote by mail is best for you. 2, do I want to vote ahead of election day but don't want to go through the mail? Then voting absentee in person at your election board office or one of their satellite offices might be right for you. 3, I want to vote on election day. Then make a plan ahead of time. Make sure you've got the PPE. Make sure you check your voting location. And if you have questions, you can always call the Election Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE, and they'll help walk you through those 3 options and figure out which one is best for you. So let's talk real quick then about those of you that want to vote by mail. I want to point out, and I'll share a link in the screen to the newest palm card the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has recently released that spells out all the ins and outs of voting by mail in Missouri in 2020. But let's just go through a few things. And I know I only have a few minutes, and that JMO is going to put a big stop sign up when they want me to stop. Yes? Okay. Okay. Really what I want to focus on is of those three options, the voting by mail option, because it is the most complicated. So you've decided you want to vote by mail. The first question then you need to ask yourself is, what type of mail ballot is right for me? Here in Missouri, we have two types of mail-in ballots. One requires an excuse and the other does not. Now you want to look at this list of excuses I have on the screen here to see if you might fall into one of these categories, because if you do, the excuse-based absentee ballot may be the right option for you. It's easier to request and it's easier to return than the no excuse mail-in ballots. See, Missouri is a state that generally only allows people to vote absentee if they have an excuse, if they meet a reason to be away from the polls. But because of the pandemic, lawmakers added several provisions to allow people to vote by mail this year, including a reason to vote absentee without a notary for people who are in an at-risk category for COVID-19, and a new way to vote by mail for any other voter that does not meet one of these absentee categories. But like I mentioned, those ballots are harder to request, they're harder to return, and they all have to be notarized in person. So the reasons that you can vote absentee, again, you want to see if any of these apply to you. So if they do, this is going to be the better way to go. You can vote absentee if you're going to be outside of your jurisdiction, which means outside of your election jurisdiction, basically outside of your county. And it doesn't have to be 100% guarantee, but if you expect, if you work outside of your county, or if you frequently travel outside of your county or think you might be, that could be a reason you can vote absentee. You can also vote absentee if you have a religious belief that prevents you from going to the polls, if you're working as a poll worker on election day, if you're incarcerated but retain the right to vote, like someone in pretrial detention who hasn't been convicted yet. If you're in an address confidentiality program, like perhaps domestic violence victims or people in witness protection. You can vote absentee for those reasons, but you can also vote absentee for two really important health-related reasons that will not require you to get that ballot notarized. So listen to these two carefully to see if they might apply to you. You can vote absentee with no notary if you are incapacitated or confined due to illness or disability, or if you are serving as a caretaker for someone who is. If so, you can vote absentee without a notary. I fall into this category. For example, while I am not confined due to illness, I am a caretaker for my 89-year-old mother who is homebound. So I can vote absentee under excuse number 2, and I do not need to get my ballot notarized. The other reason is the new one, and this is only in effect for 2020. Do you have or are you in an at-risk category for contracting or spreading COVID-19? If so, you can vote absentee without a notary. And I just want to show you sort of who falls into that category. It's not everybody who's at risk for COVID-19, which by the way is really all of us, isn't it? It's just a limited list of people who are at particular risk. But this is the list. It does cover a lot of people, but it doesn't cover everybody. So this is going to include, you can vote absentee without a notary under excuse number 7, the COVID excuse, if you meet one of these. So this will apply to any voter over age 65, regardless of their health status. Any voter over age 65 can vote absentee without a notary under excuse number 7. In addition, anyone in a long-term care facility, regardless of your age, anyone with chronic lung disease, regardless of age, anyone with a serious heart condition, anyone who is immunocompromised, anyone with diabetes, anyone with liver disease, anyone with chronic kidney disease who's on dialysis can also vote absentee under that reason number 7 without a notary. So
Denise,
yes.
just want to give you kind of a time caution here.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna wrap this up here, but the one thing I do want to note, because we're getting a lot of reports about this. In fact, I just got one about 5 minutes ago from someone whose request for an absentee ballot was rejected because they checked too many boxes on the form. So take a look at this form. You only want to select one. If you qualify to vote, and this may be a little bit easier to see, if you qualify to vote absentee, pick one of those 7 reasons that meets your circumstance. Only if you do not, and not more than one. So I just got an email from somebody who they're confined due to illness, so they checked that, but they also have COVID, and so they checked number 7, they checked number 2 and number 7, and their request for a ballot got rejected. So only pick one. Only if you do not fall into one of those categories to vote absentee should you check the mail-in request. And the reason is, like I said, absentee ballots are easier to request. They can be requested over email. They are easier to return. They can be returned in person. In contrast, those mail ballots cannot be requested over email. They can only be requested by mail or in person. And they can only be returned by United States mail, and they all must be notarized. So take a look at that list, see if you meet one of those 7 reasons, and then check only one on your application. I'm going to stop there, but tell you if you have any questions about your eligibility and how to make this work, if you're confused navigating this process, just call us at 866-OUR-VOTE. You could also chat at 866ourvote.org. And you can also contact me at denise@movpc.org.
Denise, this is Robbie Frank. I have one question. I've been told that if you request a mail-in ballot and check number 7 for COVID, that it must be mailed back. It cannot be delivered in person.
That's because there is no excuse number 7 for mail-in ballots. There's no excuses at all.
Excuse me, for absentee.
Right. So this is my point, is that this is why it's really important to distinguish between whether you qualify to vote absentee. If you check excuse number 7, that's an absentee ballot. Only check absentee. Though any absentee ballot can be returned in person or by United States mail. However, regardless of what your status is, if you check mail-in ballot, that ballot will have to be notarized and it will have to be sent by mail. So again, pick the right ballot for you.
But I've been told that if you check absentee number 7, that you can't deliver it in person.
You can. Absentee ballots can be returned in person or by mail. In addition, you can also go vote absentee in person yourself at the election headquarters starting next Tuesday, September 22nd, where you can complete the application, checkbox number 7 if that applies to you, and get your ballot and vote all in the same visit. So you will need to decide which method is right for you. Do you need to have a ballot mailed to you? Then fill out the application, have them mail it to you. If you qualify to vote absentee and you feel like you could go to the election board, you can also do that in person in a single setting at the Board of Elections.
All right, excellent. We do have a couple more questions, but I'm going to wait and come back to them after we've heard from our dear friend Nimrod Chapel Jr. from NAACP. We will make sure that we come back to these questions. But Rod Chapel certainly knows a thing or two about voter suppression, and I think the mess they've made of voting in the pandemic in Missouri is a kind of voter suppression, is how it seems to me. They could have been much more clear about this and made it easier on people. So, Rod, what would you like to tell us today?
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you. with all due respect to my esteemed colleagues on this panel, we have a fundamental problem in the state of Missouri right now. And it is one of misinformation. It is one of, exactly as you said it, voter suppression. It's what's happening. It's what's for dinner today. And that's going to come in the form of disinformation, misinformation, through counsel such as Denise Lieberman, who is one of the baddest trial lawyers in the state, if not the region. By the time Reverend
Bad,
Dr.
you mean
Barber
good,
called,
right?
That's right.
We like
right.
bad.
Bad meaning good, right? Yes, yes. I still remember the day when Reverend Barber called and said, "You have got to meet my friend Denise." That was just so true, everything that he said. And if we've got litigation going on behalf of the NAACP and in many respects, the League of Women Voters, Denise and her team are working to ensure that our rights as citizens are not trampled. The Secretary of State doesn't care. When even the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, had a difficult time voting, he got assaulted, insulted on social media by the Secretary of State. They are not there to provide accurate or correct information that is digestible by normal human beings. As you can tell, if you've received any of these absentee ballots, not only is there little type, but there's a whole bunch of it. Turns out that there are a lot of pro-voting measures that could have been in place, and I think that it's up to us to ensure that with our vote on November 3rd, that one, we say no more are we going to tolerate this Jim Crow style voting mechanism that Missouri is trying to perpetuate, and no more are we going to allow future generations to have to go through this uncertainty. This is our time. We need to make sure with our vote and to get it right. So everything that Denise said that you'll hear from other folks, be sure and take that to heart. Go get yourself an absentee ballot. Now, for me, that's the right one to have. I'm going to get it, I'm going to fill it out, and I'm going to make sure it gets back. If I run short on time, I can do something with it. Those mail-in ballots, you can't. If you run into problems, there is a crackerjack team out there at one. Give us the number, Denise. Go ahead and say it.
6 our vote.
There it is. They are ready. You can be there with the ballot in your hand and somebody's giving you a hard time. You call 866 our vote. And there it is. Thank you, Denise. And people will get on the line with you and solve your problem. No more getting run over town, all around town. No more of these yellow snow provisional ballots. Somebody tries to give you one of those. You figure out where you're supposed to vote at and go make it happen. And for goodness sake, please be safe. Making people go to the polls or making people go get ballots notarized during a pandemic is a mistake. It's a public health care crisis. It's one that's being accentuated, if not furthered by the leadership that we have within our state. And so let's make our votes count. Thank you all so much.
Well, great. So let's clean up the questions that were left over here that I think are kind of in Denise's box, but Rod may have something to say about them as well. And we'll also see if you have some questions for Rod. So I see that you've answered one of them, Denise, around how to get those absentee ballots turned in. But there is also a question about whether the signatures are checked. And I can tell you that my partner, who's a hospice chaplain, applied to vote absentee, and they wrote back and said that her signature did not match. So there is a certain amount of checking being done, and rather than challenging it, she just decided to go vote at the polls and to turn in. Actually, what happened is they turned her down, and then they sent her an absentee ballot anyway. Even they told her she wasn't going to. They weren't going to. Then they sent her one, so she took it with her to the polls on election day and turned it in when she voted, because you'd already warned me that she'd need to do that, Denise. So,
Yep.
So that's what happened there. Yeah.
Well,
how much bias is in that signature checking?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's actually something that came up quite a bit in the recent litigation that we've been in with the NAACP, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. So a signature check is not required under law. So here's what, but some jurisdictions do it. Some jurisdictions do it just as part of a more holistic review of your eligibility to vote, and some jurisdictions make it a bright line. So it really varies from one county to another. There are 116 different election jurisdictions in Missouri, and I'll do it slightly differently. And Bob, you're right. There's not, for those that do it, what we have learned is that there's not really sort of a formal, they're not professional handwriting experts. They eyeball it. Does it look the same?
Right.
And so we know that also can, while on the one hand, seeing a signature as part of the whole universe of all of your voting history may be helpful to assess your eligibility to cast a ballot. But having the signature match be a decider should not be, because we know that there are many people whose signatures won't match, including our seniors, including voters with disabilities, including people whose signatures change over time. And if you registered to vote using that online tool and you used your finger to scribble your signature, it's not going to match to anything. Right?
Yeah,
So
right.
here's what they do have to do, and then I'll shut up. When you complete, and this is part of the reason that voting by mail is secure. That's the other message I want to give you, is that don't believe the hype, don't believe the misinformation, don't believe the false narratives about fraud in voting by mail that's coming from even office holders, including the highest office in the land. It is secure. And one reason it's secure is because they actually check your eligibility before they send you a ballot.
Yeah.
So, Mitzi the dog is not getting a ballot because Mitzi the dog is not registered to vote and doesn't have a lengthy voting record. When you submit an absentee ballot application or a mail ballot application, it goes into your record in the statewide voter registration database, which, by the way, is a cornucopia of your entire voting history in Missouri. It has everything in it. It has your original voter registration card that's been scanned. It has records of all the elections you voted in. If you've ever filled out a name change affidavit that has your signature on it, that's in there too. They also often scan in those absentee ballot applications. What they do is they look and see, they check your, and by the way, they also have access to the last 4 of your social security number and your driver's license number, because they needed that to process your registration in the first place. They match all that up, your birth date, your address. They check all the pieces on your absentee ballot application against what's in your voter record, including in some cases also eyeballing that signature to determine that you are in fact eligible to vote in this election at the address that you've listed. And only once that check is complete do they send you the ballot in the mail.
But how nonpartisan is that? That's my question.
It must be conducted by bipartisan teams according to state law.
Must be, is a question.
I mean, what I'll say, but state law does mandate bipartisan teams, and the election authorities that have staffs do they have to be 50-50. Those smaller jurisdictions that are run by a county clerk that don't have any staff, they are still required to bring in teams of people so that there's parity in the staff that are reviewing those.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, like when I go to visit to vote absentee in advance, which is what I generally do, because I generally am in Jefferson City on election days, since our headquarters is down there. The two different judges from each party look at my stuff before they sign off and let me vote. So there is a certain amount of bipartisan checking on these things. So let's see if there's another question. Are they removing registered voters' names from the database without notifying the voters?
So I think you might be referring to voter purges. And under federal law, it's illegal to conduct a purge of the voter rolls within 90 days of a federal election. So the only reason you could be removed from the rolls now at this point, because we're well within that 90-day period, is if there was a disqualifying event. So for example, if you die, they'll get a record from Social Security and they are allowed to remove you. If you become incarcerated between now and election day due to a conviction for a felony, or if you become adjudicated by a probate judge as being incompetent to vote.
Okay, well, we really appreciate the good information from Denise and Rod, and I want to make sure that we leave adequate time let's see, can you find out if your ballot has been received once you send it? Yes, you can. And just call your Board of Elections and they will be able to tell you that. Some of the jurisdictions use barcodes that you can give them a check-in number online, but that varies from place to place. They were able to tell me that they had my absentee ballot when I sent it in back in August. So, and I did check because I wanted to make sure that my vote counted for Amendment 3 to close that Medicaid coverage gap. So I wasn't about to let the chance get away from me. So let's all be as vigilant about Amendment 3 as we were about yes on 2 back in August. I might have got my numbers switched around there. So thanks again to Denise and Rod, and we're going to move on to Michael and Mary to hear about no on 3. Empower Missouri helped to put the clean amendment on the ballot back in 2018, and 62% of the voters voted for government ethics reforms and nonpartisan redistricting in 2018. Unfortunately, the General Assembly has pulled some shenanigans to put this back on the ballot in 2020. So Mary and Michael are going to help us know what's going on so that we can do a great job. If you have some more questions there for Rod and Denise, just post them in the chat box. We'll make sure that they get answered before we close, either in the chat box or live. But we'll turn to Michael and Mary now.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to start and then turn it over to Michael, and then we're going to ping pong back and forth. My name is Mary Timmel, and I am an organizer on the No on Amendment 3 campaign. And as JMO covered, No on Amendment 3 is working to not only undo what we did when we got Clean Missouri on the ballot and passed it, but it's going to do so much more. It is, we're coming together as a coalition to fight this politician protection plan. And Amendment 3 is protecting politicians by putting gerrymandering in the Constitution and also by misleading and deceiving voters. So we're going to highlight some of those dirty details and then talk about what Amendment 3 is trying to undo. And so one of the first things we want to talk about is, as mentioned, 62% of Missourians came together and voted for fair maps, clear process, and transparency. And you don't get that kind of you don't get those kind of numbers that showed without bipartisan support. And while we were all doing that, politicians and lobbyists were working to overturn the will of the voters before 2018, before we even voted. So they spent 2 years putting something together, and they've called it now. It's going to be Amendment 3, and it's going to be on the ballot. And it's going to provide safe districts for politicians and allow that gerrymandering. And it does it in a couple of ways. So there are some smoke screens that they've put up to try and trick voters. They're talking about and claiming that it eliminates all lobbying gifts. It's taking that lobbying gift from $5 down to $0. So it's a $5 change. And then they're also talking about campaign contribution limits for state Senate candidates. The change that they're proposing there is only $100. So that's all it is. It's a $105 change. And in exchange for that, everything else in Amendment 3 is about redistricting. And so some of the bad things you would expect, of course, are more partisanship, more secrecy, because the Missouri politician or the politicians that put this together know that Missouri voters would never vote for this. So they are hiding behind a smokescreen. They're going to carve up the communities, have some weekend protections for voters, and new loopholes that are going to help protect politicians in this plan. And some of the brand new bad things are, the details that are behind the ballot language. It's more things than you would expect. It puts lobbyists and political operatives in charge of drawing maps. It allows them to insert partisanship and secrecy and carve up communities behind closed doors. And this is all in an effort to create super safe districts. So as part of their plan, Amendment 3 also weakens voter protection laws. And on top of all of that, this extreme radical and discriminatory proposals, one of the other things they're talking about is they're proposing that we don't count everyone when we do the math. I was gonna hand it off to Michael. Was this where we're switching?
That works for me. And so, hello, everybody. As Mary attests, there's a lot of things that are bad. And so there's a lot of and thens and thens and thens. And so we really just want to make that clear, but also illustrate that for you as well. And so the courts have already demonstrated and confirmed what we already knew. The exact quotes from those court rulings: literally false. Voters are likely to be misled. We know the original language was misleading, deceptive, which Nimrod and Denise alluded to a little bit. It's intentional. But then also nearly every aspect of the statement is wrong or misleading. And so these are intentional efforts in reducing representation of communities throughout the state in Jeff City. And so, as I mentioned, I want to just share a little bit of visuals and how you can really break this down a little bit, simplify it. I know everyone at Empower Missouri is absolutely amazing, well-informed, but we just want to show you so you can take these talking points and really convey them to your friends and across your networks as we continue to raise awareness. And so, one, this will make Missouri the only state in the country that would not count all of its residents. There is no other state in our country that does not count all of its residents. I'll say that one more time. There is no state in our country that does not count all of its residents. And so as Nimrod mentioned, regressive policies and things, we don't want to be the state on the bottom half of another bad list. There's a national spotlight on us, and we want to say in 2018, we decided this 2-1, and here we are again with the opportunity to ensure the will of Missourians is intact. We don't want to set any precedents that the things we put on the ballot and pass can be undone by supermajorities. And so, the number one explicit goal as identified in the court hearings is that there is one count for every one voter. This was outlined in the court hearings, and this explicitly cuts out our children. This cuts out our immigrant status or non-citizen status folks. And I want to make one thing clear here, that these are individuals that will likely be eligible to vote in the near future over the next 10 years. And so we could literally have voters that are not represented in Jeff City. Again, we could literally have voters that are not represented in Jefferson City. So this is why this is concerning. And so right now, Missouri has a population of just over 6 million, with that being about 4.5 million approximately of eligible voters. So we're talking about 1.5 million people throughout our state that will not be represented when districts are drawn up. And so I really want to just point out quotes as we go along to really highlight how bad it is. And so when you see gerrymandering experts come out and say that this is advantageous to non-Hispanic whites, we know that the state of Missouri is more diverse than just a community full of our white community members. We have a diverse state made up of children that goes and spans beyond our rural urban areas, but into our rural communities as well. And we want to make sure that we're protecting families. And so what does this look like? So here's another visual. When you look at these blocks, and this is a total of what communities look like, those blue blocks there are teal. Those are our children. Those are our community members who may be ineligible to vote. Those are our community members of non-citizen status. And so when you look at it and you take those individuals away, you're talking about a significant chunk of our communities not represented in our state capital. 21% in our white communities, 28% in our Black communities. And if that wasn't alarming enough, 54% of our Asian and Latinx communities would be excluded from representation in our state capital. And so if we do not count everyone, what is the implications on that? As I mentioned, representation profoundly impacted, but then also communities that have, or rather made up of families are not accurately represented in our state capitol. You talk about regressive policies and the way this makes people of color particularly feel. You're telling me that now my family is represented at 3/5 in the state capitol. What does that remind us of? We talk about our Latinx and our Asian communities, the ones working hard for citizenship, not being represented when they are finally US citizens. And so these are the implications of this vote. It really takes us back to Jim Crow, and we literally have a date on that. And so just want to highlight another quote here is that a loss in representation in the state legislature leads to a decline in our state funding for affected counties and municipalities. We are in a census year, and St. Louis particularly knows when folks aren't counted, we lose representation. And we lost representation 10 years ago at the federal level. And now with an amendment like this, we can further lose representation and funding and how resources are allocated. And I'll speak to the fiscal note a little bit here. And so there is no cost savings here. There is no cost benefit here. But what we do know is that when there is loss of representation in communities, that changes how funding is allocated. So public health, public safety, infrastructure, all the things that we need to ensure that our communities are thriving and well will the funding for those will be reduced. And a lot of our municipalities and communities are already struggling. Missouri is in a budget crisis. That's why Amendment 2 was so important. And so we want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves back. We're not setting our communities back, but we're also positioning our state in a way that our children, that our hardworking family members, our hardworking people that are trying to establish citizenship are also represented in our state capitol. And so what does this look like in a formula? We want to further show just visuals of this misrepresentation, the deception, but then the blatant lies in this. And so Mary and I will tag team the remainder of the presentation together. But as we know, here's how we can end gerrymandering once and for all. Missouri has a chance to say no. This is not it. This is not the way we want to take our country in. And so this starts with us. This starts with awareness. This starts with spreading the word. And I know Mary will share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's the really good point, right? We know how to avoid gerrymandering. You can do it with math. And we talked about it in, you know, what we wanted in the state. And what Amendment 3 does is it actually gives permission for politicians to rig the maps. And so what it looks at, the formula and the fine print. Oh, okay. So right now we use a measure to track how far toward one party a map can lean, right? And so what voters in Missouri approved were reforms to direct map makers to make that number as small as is practicable. When Amendment 3, on the other hand, takes that gap and makes it much larger because it actually explicitly allows for a much larger gap. So it gives map makers a license to make those maps so skewed that it would be worse than removing the rules right now that require fair and competitive maps, because it tells them, okay, this is how far you can go to rig these maps. And I think Michael hit on this is, you know, no state house map has been this gerrymandered is what Amendment 3 proposes in the past 40 years in any state. And so it's worse than anything we've had before, and it's worse than anything in the past 40 years.
Yeah, and to that point, as we both alluded to, the past 40 years, this takes us back to Jim Crow South Mississippi, and that's just unacceptable. And Tamara, I hope I got your name right in the chat, mentioned about language about those who are ineligible to vote, and you're absolutely right. Those who are incarcerated or under probation and parole that are ineligible to vote will not be counted either. And what we do know, and there's evidence that we can point to, Missouri is the #1 incarcerator in the world. Women incarceration rates are increasing. Our overall incarceration rates are increasing, but those folks also come home and they will not be represented. And so this is not just, this is not right. And we want to continue to elevate that. And as far as the language, those wins have established revising the language, and we're excited about what that language will look like. And we will be sure to follow up and share that new language with you. And so the new barriers to challenges and rigged maps in court, we want to point that out as well, that if Amendment 3 passes, this puts an unprecedented blockage on our ability to sue, our ability for judges to throw out illegal plans. As Mary mentioned, that there is a back room of drawing of maps. There is some secrecy here. And within a process that's not transparent, it doesn't allow us to go back and say, no, this is completely wrong. And we know how this happens. We know how it works. We know the intentionality behind it. We know the efforts that have been made so that the original language was deceitful for these types of purposes. And again, I can't stress enough, that's why we're saying no.
Right. And I think, and that builds toward what we've been talking about. You know, there's radical details in this fine print. There's the voter mandate that we all came together and said in 2018, what we wanted has led to a bipartisan coalition saying no on Amendment 3. And it's important that we say no now, right? They've already thought ahead. Okay, well, what would they do if we had rigged maps, right? Well, they would try to sue us. Okay, so let's just try to set up as many barriers. So voting no, being part of this coalition, working hard to say no is so important. And we have a couple of quotes.
Yep.
Oh, I'm going to turn it back to you, Michael. I always love this part.
Yeah, more quotes. And one thing I would just want to highlight is the bipartisanship here, similar to ballot initiatives in the past that Empower Missouri has been a part of. There's diversity here. There is a wide spectrum of faith groups, of community-based organizations, of politicians and leaders on both sides of the aisle saying this is not it. Reverend Dr. Scarcy Wilson is one of those. And Mary, I know you want to share this quote, so go ahead.
I do. I really think it's important to say it as directly as Dr. Scarcy Wilson says. Amendment 3 weakens the power of Black and Brown communities in the democratic process. And that is unacceptable. And I'm going to mute because I've got a barking dog. I'm so sorry.
And here's Senator Danforth saying a redistricting scheme like this is more extreme than Missouri has ever seen. I just want to add on to his quote. It's not only the most extreme Missouri has ever seen, it's the most extreme this country has ever seen. And again, we don't want to be on the bad end of another bad policy, another bad statistic. And this is our opportunity to say enough is enough. And so, how can you get more information? I'm going to be sure to follow up as we're doing Q&A. I'm going to drop some documents in the chat, but we'll also follow up via email with some things. But spread the word. Go to our Facebook /Clean Missouri, and then on Twitter @Clean Missouri, and then also on Instagram. And share with your friends. I can't express enough how relational organizing is so important. We saw it with Medicaid expansion. We saw it with the 2018 clean vote. And so continue to just share with your loved ones, your friends, people in your community, because I know for a fact that I cannot reach your loved ones and friends the same way you can. And so while I may be able to express this and simplify it in a way, I know that relational organizing is the most beneficial. So continue to share across your Facebook. The share button is so easy. Texting is so easy. I know we hate those chain letters, but during election cycles, they're so valuable. So we continue to just express how easy it is to just share information nowadays. So leverage social media in that capacity. I know Mary wants to share a little more about how you can get involved.
I do. Thank you. And sorry I had to drop off. So we need volunteers. We know that you all are informed and you care and you're passionate advocates for your community. And so we need you to sign up and volunteer. We're running phone banks 3 times a week, and we have a variety of different time periods to fit your schedules. So we have Wednesday evenings from 3 to 6. We have starting Thursday nights, starting the upcoming Thursday from 6 to 9, and then Saturday mornings from 10 to 1. And so I wanted to ask all of you I would ask you one by one, but there's too many, to commit to 3 shifts between now and Election Day with Clean Missouri to make sure we vote no on Amendment 3. And so if you want to go ahead and be the first one to throw down in the chat when you're coming to join us, this Saturday you get me on your phone bank along with our Director of Organizing, Lexi Amos. And then starting through the rest of the things, you'll alternate between me, my colleague Allie, and Lexi, and we will be training you. It's the Through Talk system that we're all probably pretty familiar with from all the work we did this summer. So we're using Through Talk. We do an overview. We stay on Zoom to help you out through technical difficulties. And again, yeah, we need you each for 3 shifts. So that is my plea, and I'm going to check in this chat and see who's committed already. And you guys can throw them in there throughout. You can sign up online at cleanmissouri.org/volunteer and get the information there. But we really do need you to help. Donations are always great too. You win by organizing people and organizing money. So you can donate at cleanmissouri.org and come on out and volunteer. And if you have other groups, and I think Michael hit on this as well, anybody else that we can talk to, people that you can turn out and send over to us to volunteer, we will welcome them and get them trained up and ready to win.
And I'll add to that because one of the powers in campaigns is coalition building. And so I know many of you are representing multiple organizations. Your networks are broad and vast. And so we encourage you to just share this information to build that coalition. We need people endorsing. We need organizations endorsing. We need folks writing letters to the editor. We need folks writing op-eds. We want community members participating in press conferences. So we're asking you to do that. And so you can contact me directly. We'll get folks trained up. We'll make sure they have the proper talking points or whatever they need. But we want to continue to grow this coalition. I have a little bit of a stronger stance on all of this. As a Black male in America, it is difficult for me to ignore racism and inequities. And after Clean Missouri, and after Medicaid expansion, after folks speaking up about the social injustices that we saw with in this country over the last several months, there have been companies speaking out. And so if you decide to sit on the sideline, you're complicit in the status quo. And we know early on, JMO, you mentioned it, the systemic racism that Denise mentioned, the sexism that exists in our systems, we have to stand up against it. And this campaign is representative of the will of Missourians, and we want to continue to say no to all things bad that are coming out of Jeff City, and that's why we're saying no on Amendment 3.
Okay, great. There's a couple questions, and then Charlotte Moten is wanting to make sure that you sign up to do this for ADAPT Missouri too, and that would be great. So Tamara Kinney had one question that hasn't been addressed yet. So Tamara, would you go ahead and voice that for us, please?
Sure. Can you hear me, JMO?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I just kind of wanted to, I think you answered some of what I asked Mikel, but I just want to ask a couple other things. One, has there been any proponent of this amendment that has actually said that about this broader exclusion of people? I just keep seeing, undocumented immigrants and children. But if we're actually talking about all of these other categories of people and knowing the racial disparities in incarceration in this country, I mean, this is a tremendous issue. So I'm just curious, has anyone come out and explicitly said it? It's clearly contemplated in the comments of the Solicitor General and the sponsor of SJR 38, but has anyone really acknowledged that that's what they hope to accomplish here?
Not yet. That's something that we're working on. A lot of things are evolving like lightning speed with this campaign, as we know, with the courts and what played out. And so that's something that the campaign is diligently working on, is to make sure that we're integrating the proper messaging. And that requires polling and some other things. And so the courts kind of delayed some of that process. And I know that the leaders within the campaign are working on that so we can get the proper message now, we can communicate it correctly, but then also making sure that there are no faults in a lot of that. And so just crossing our T's and dotting our I's. And so we have some sense of urgency, but we also realize we got to get it right and make sure that we're not missing anything or have any blind spots. So it's happening. If you have any suggestions or anything, please feel free to contact me. We want to make sure that we are not missing anything as we're communicating this. But then also, that's why it's critical for leaders to speak up. That's why we suggest writing op-eds, letters to the editors, because these are fantastic questions. This is a significant exclusion that isn't just isolated to just one area in our state. We know that mass incarceration and the incarceration rate in our state affects the entire state and disenfranchises a lot of people. There's the opportunity for entire families not to be represented in Jeff City. Entire families.
And so as outlandish as it sounds, though, it's not a crazy concern for us to think that it's possible that this could be the thought, to go that broad to excluding. And then my last question was just, I read the court opinions when the language was challenged in the circuit and appellate court. And didn't see any mention of that one vote, one person issue, and just was curious why. And then also you had mentioned the final language. Is the language as written by the appellate court, is that not final? Is there still potential for that language to be changed?
No, we're just making sure that again, there are no hiccups and we're communicating everything accurately. And so what's on our website is what we know to date. And so I won't say final. Final seems a lot more concrete and definite. But if something is to change, you'll be the first to know. And one thing that we're really excited about is the fiscal language there being added, but then also noting that the repeal of the 2018 vote was added as well. And so we're just thankful and grateful for that and the outcomes of that. But just final it just sounds so definite. And so I just don't want to make it seem as concrete and black and white as that, because we know everything with this campaign has been everything but black and white. And so that's all.
Yeah, and I think
voting starts on the 22nd. Voting starts on the 22nd. I was going to say,
I think to build on Michael's point, if you are looking at the Secretary of State's website, that is you see language right now. So there's plenty of folks already reading that language as they're getting ready for that date. So in addition to Michael's point of, we don't want to say final yet, but there's certainly plenty of people who are reading it as they're gearing up.
Certainly.
And we want to make sure that
we're
countering that.
I do have just a little bit more material to cover, so I'm going to run through that in a hurry. I want to thank all of our speakers for today, but some more things have been going on. I just want to make sure that you know that the Missouri General Assembly just did complete the extra session on violent crime that our governor called, and also the veto session. Only 2 of 7 bills that were introduced during the extra session. Well, lots more than 7 were introduced, but 7 of them had hearings. 2 of them passed. House Bill 46 on residency requirements for police and police department employees or public safety employees in the city of St. Louis, and House Bill 66 to create a pretrial witness protection fund, but it doesn't have money in it yet. No vetoes were overridden during the veto session, and there are certainly lots of rumors about additional extra sessions being called. Perhaps one on COVID-19 liability is on the wish list, especially of the majority caucus. Our Smart Sentencing Coalition did a lot of work during the extra session, and we did have 3 victories. Senate Bill 1 died. That bill included more mandatory adult certification hearings for juveniles as young as 12 in the original version of the bill, sponsored by Senator Lieberman in response to Governor Parsons' call. We know that Black children have been 6 times more likely to be certified to stand trial or sentenced as adults. So having more mandatory hearings for children is not a good idea. So we were able to help kill Senate Bill 1. House Bill 12 also died. That's the House version of that adult certification part of Senate Bill 1. And then in committee, we actually improved House Bill 12 so that it actually would have been an improvement in juvenile justice policy. But once it got improved, they wouldn't let it come to the floor for debate, interestingly enough. The General Assembly has now adjourned what they call sine die, a Latin phrase meaning with no date to come back this year. An extra session can still be called, but that would take the governor doing it or the General Assembly signing a petition to get it called back together. Other than that, they come back on the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January. So that's when they would next be coming back for the 2021 legislative session. At the federal level, we know that there's still a big need for robust federal relief to be passed for coronavirus protection. I'm going to have to stop sharing and back up here because I've missed one of my slides. The U.S. Senate got together and did not pass good legislation that was needed, unfortunately, and they called it the skinny package, but it really is more of an emaciated package. Here we go. Current slide. On September 10th, Mitch McConnell brought a vote that failed by a 52 to 47 vote with only one Republican voting no. That was Rand Paul from Kentucky. The U.S. House has passed a $3.4 trillion package of coronavirus relief. The U.S. Senate package that was voted on was just $650 billion, so that's a very small package of aid. We're still trying to get Senators Blunt and Hawley to convince McConnell and their colleagues to get back and do what Missouri needs to have done. We just released a report with the Coalition on Human Needs about what the latest U.S. Census Bureau Household Pulse Survey shows. We know that the COVID diagnoses in Missouri have been going up 9%, whereas nationally there's been a drop of 17%. So we're doing a lot worse in Missouri than many other states. 40%, almost half of Missouri households have lost income since March. Of those households where some income has been lost, 22% reported on the Pulse survey that they did not have enough to eat at some point during the last week. And 13% of those households said that they couldn't pay rent last month. But there was a huge racial disparity. 40% of Latinx households couldn't pay rent. 20% of Black households couldn't pay rent. So we obviously really need our senators to get together. It's going to be complicated because we also have the matter of a continued resolution to keep government open due by October 1st. Senators cannot be allowed to abandon huge numbers of their constituents who can't pay rent or buy food. Many of them need an extended unemployment option, which is now, winding down. That extra $600 a week thing is done. Missouri had some short-term aid of $300, but that's running out as well. It will deepen and lengthen the recession if we don't offer help, and it will create a flood of evictions when the CDC imposed moratorium expires in December. You can find everything you need to advocate on this issue, including that latest report with the Coalition on Human Need on what the census data stuff said, at our website under news and updates, the COVID-19 call to action section. If you want to dive deep into that, tomorrow Deborah Weinstein from the Coalition on Human Needs is speaking at 9 a.m. Register on our website under events. Debbie is one of my social justice heroes. You can come to another webinar on October 15th. This time we're going to talk about housing comes first, why we must solve our affordable housing crisis. One of the speakers will be Brooke Shipwright. I've also invited an academic to talk about social determinants of health. And we'll have some updated information on the low-income housing tax credit program here in Missouri. Brooke is the housing advocacy organizer with NAACP. We are the state partner of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. You can also dig into the evictions issue tomorrow with our forums series. Kansas City and St. Louis, instead of meeting in person to have forums, are now doing that online. The first one starts for fall tomorrow with Kalila Jackson, Gina Chiala, Justin Lockhart, and Sarah Owsley, all looking at the evictions crisis that we have that could be coming soon when the CDC imposed moratorium goes away. We have our Affordable Housing Coalition meeting on Monday, October 12th, Smart Sentencing on Friday, October 16th. The HIV Justice Coalition meets on the second and fourth Friday of every month. Food security tomorrow with Debbie Weinstein, but we may be changing which Friday that's on because it occurred to us that maybe having Smart Sentencing and Food Coalition on the same day is a little hard on our staff. It's a lot of things to get done in a single day. And there's How to Find Me. So those are some things that I wanted to mention as we are wrapping up. And it's about time to wrap up. I want to say that when I was a state representative, the International Institute was in my district. And there were a lot of immigrants and refugees, many of whom would be becoming citizens. As Mike said, you know, some of those people that are in prison now and can't vote now will be back out in the community soon. Do you want them unrepresented and not counted in how we redistrict? A lot of folks who are survivors of torture and war trauma come to the United States, and supposedly we say we want to welcome them. But to not count them and how we do districts is really objectionable. And those folks came to me for things. There were taxi drivers from Eritrea and Somalia who were being charged $1,100 to get a permit to drive a taxi from the airport in St. Louis. Whereas if they weren't airport taxi drivers, it was $55 a year, $1,100 versus $55 a year. That's a serious justice issue there. And these were non-citizens, but on their way to becoming citizens who came to me for help. You give services as a state representative, you need to count everybody in your district, not just the voters. That's the most ludicrous voting plan I've ever heard of. Thank you all for being here today. Don't forget to vote no on 3 on November 3rd. What happens when we come together? What did Reverend Barber say? When we come together, we win. Let's say that. We win. We win when we come together. We win when we come together. Let's not forget to come together, and let's not forget to vote. Thank you to Kathleen and Denise and Rod and Mike and Mary for being with us today. And be sure and share this exciting webinar with your friends. Bye-bye.